Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Unplugged. Today I'm doing a John Cassavetes tier list, one of my favorite filmmakers. I've been meaning to do this tier list for a while. I was actually hoping to time it with my John Cassavetes video essay, that big-ass, like, half-hour plus video essay that I made on him. I was planning to have this tier list come out in conjunction with that, and it's now months later, and I'm only just getting around to it. That video essay is over on the Brickwall Pictures channel if you want to take a look. And if you're new here, I have tier lists for a whole bunch of other filmmakers and also a bunch of actors, both of which describe John Cassavetes. And as you'll notice from our pool of films here, a lot of these are his directorial efforts, but there are also a few just straight up acting roles where he wasn't involved behind the camera at all. And we're actually starting with one of those, because this is a randomized order. But first up is Rosemary's Baby. Even if you've never seen any of his directorial work, I think there's a good chance that you will still know him at the very least as the husband in Rosemary's Baby, one of his biggest roles. I'd say one of his two biggest roles, with the other being in The Dirty Dozen over here, which we'll get to later. Rosemary's Baby is a classic of the horror genre. It is, it's slow, creeping dread rather than like in-your-face horror. It's exceptionally well directed, and it does wonders with subtlety. John Cassavetes is great in his supporting role, but the real star of the show is Mia Farrow, and she is excellent. Oh yeah, it's a real classic, a real gem of the horror genre. Some people might watch it for the first time and think, oh, it's a little too slow or it's boring or whatever. I don't think so. I think it holds up remarkably. It's at least A. I might go all the way to S, but I think I'm going to say A. At this moment in time, I'm feeling A. Next up is Faces. This one is a John Cassavetes directorial effort. This was his big return after making Shadows quite a bit earlier and then dropping off the radar as far as directorial work was concerned. He came roaring back with Faces. Actually, that's not true. He made a couple of studio films in between, which we will talk about. That would be Too Late Blues and A Child is Waiting. But between Shadows and Faces, these were the two that both feel like Cassavetes movies, whereas the other two really don't at all feel like Cassavetes movies. And they're really not. They're more like studio system movies. Faces is a drama that's all about kind of divorce primarily, but also like affairs and just sort of relationships in general. It's an interesting film structurally in that it only has a couple of scenes. It's a pretty long movie. I think it's around 2.5 hours long, but there's only like 5 or maybe 6 scenes in it, and they're all just extremely long, and they kind of unfold in this really spontaneous way that feels completely improvised, and you can find conflicting reports about how much actually was improvised versus wasn't. Some say nothing was improvised, others say the whole thing is improvised. I think the closest thing to reality is that there was a lot of improvising in rehearsals and like with the actors and stuff, and then on set the scenes are set but not necessarily how they move through them or how they're interpreted. Cassavetes was known for always doing lots and lots of takes and for actually refusing to give direction to his actors. Even if they explicitly asked, he would kind of like circumlocute. He would talk in circles around them until they got confused, as Peter Falk said in that interview clip that I used in my Cassavetes video essay, and then he would just be rolling, and he didn't actually like tell you anything about your like motivation or what the character is actually supposed to be thinking and feeling in that moment in time. Anyway, Faces is really great. It's a bit of a harder watch than some of his other movies in that you do feel the length of those really long scenes, and it is very winding and meandering. It's a case of you could probably make a tighter edit of the movie. Instead of it being 2.5 hours, you could probably streamline it down to like 1:45, and the whole thing would be tighter, and you wouldn't lose much substance, but you would lose some texture and some detail and some great little moments of acting that maybe aren't essential to the narrative. But Cassavetes is never really prioritizing the narrative. It's always about the characters and what they're thinking and feeling and the acting. Faces is great though, but openly, it's a bit of a harder watch. I would say don't start with it as your first Cassavetes film. Warm up to Faces, or rather warm up with his other movies and then get to Faces once you have a good grasp of his style, because it's a little rough around the edges. It is more refined than Shadows, however. Cassavetes is not a filmmaker who I would recommend starting at the beginning with. Lots of filmmakers I like to go back to the beginning of their career and go through in order. Don't do that with Cassavetes. You're going to have a better time if you start with one of his more polished movies, get a feel for how he does things, how he operates, what he prioritizes, and then you can go back to the early stuff that's a little rougher. Faces is, I think, an A, but it's a very rough A. It's an A once it gestates and sits with you for a while. As you're watching it, you might not get a whole lot of enjoyment out of it, but it's powerful. It's great. Next up is Love Streams, which was kind of Cassavetes' final movie. It's his final fully authorial movie. He did sort of co-direct one other movie. By co-direct, I mean he took over for the original director, not like they shared directorial duties. But I think he was uncredited, at least originally. And also he didn't write the script, and it wasn't a project he cared about. He just did it because it was a Peter Falk movie, and Peter Falk needed a pinch hitter director to come in, and he did that for his buddy Peter Falk. So Love Streams is the last true Cassavetes film, and it's a hell of a note to go out on. It is incredible. I talked about this one at length in sort of the final chapter of my Cassavetes video essay. This is a full-on S-tier movie, one of his best. It's not my favorite of his, but it actually might be his best on a technical level as far as the cinematography, the way he's playing around with some subjective storytelling stuff that he didn't really do anywhere else. It's really great. It's also one of his most refined, not quite his most accessible. That would probably be Gloria as far as his directorial work goes. But it's phenomenal. This is one you can start with, or save it for last because it was his last. Either or. Next up, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. This is one of his most popular, one of his most famous and most acclaimed. And I got to be honest. This is the one that disappointed me out of his entire body of work. This is the only one where I left a little disappointed. Not fully disappointed, not to where I didn't like the movie. I still thought it was really good and I still really enjoyed it, but I didn't love it in the real emotional feeling a connection to the film way that I felt with all of his other directorial work, the studio product too notwithstanding, and I guess kind of Gloria notwithstanding too. I would say I did enjoy it about as much, or maybe a little more than Gloria. The thing with The Killing of a Chinese Bookie is that there are two distinct cuts of it. One of them is the director's cut, which is much longer and came out a couple of years later. Now, I watched the director's cut because, I'm a fan of the director, so I want to watch his cut. And it's longer. It's got a bunch of scenes that, were taken out originally. The thing is, I think I might have actually preferred the original shorter cut because my problems with this movie mostly stem from the kind of meandering qualities that all of his movies have, but they usually circle back around to landing the plane on that sidetrack was worth it, the meandering was worth it. Whereas in this one, a lot of the scenes that are in the director's cut that were taken out from the original cut, to my knowledge, having not watched the theatrical cut yet, but just researching it, it seems like most of the additional scenes in the director's cut are just extra cabaret performances in the club that's run by the main character, who's played by Ben Gazzara, and I think his name is Cosmo Vitali or whatever. And Ben Gazzara is great in it. Also, the centerpiece, the titular killing of a Chinese bookie sequence, it's gripping. That sequence is phenomenal. And there's lots of great character stuff going on with Cosmo and great performance stuff going on with Gazzara. There's just a little too much time spent fucking around in the nightclub for me in the director's cut. But I'm looking forward to watching the theatrical cut that kind of streamlines things. And also, I'm pretty sure, I couldn't remember the quote off the top of my head or where I found it, but I do believe I at one point found an interview with Cassavetes saying that after he put out his director's cut, he eventually changed his mind and he was like, oh no, it was better the first time. My director's cut's worse. And I found that quote after having watched his director's cut. So I think it's a case of him changing his mind on it, which has happened other times. I think Francis Ford Coppola ended up saying that the Apocalypse Now Redux was worse than the original version. I'm pretty sure that was another case of a director going back on his own director's cut. My first time viewing was kind of a C, if I'm being honest. But it has really high highs, and I would expect that the theatrical version would at least get a B, if not higher, from me. So, but there's a little asterisk on this one that I'll watch the theatrical cut, and I expect it to bump up. Okay, next up is an odd one. This is the Alfred Hitchcock the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, not Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which is a different thing. This is the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, which is I think it's the show that came after Presents. It expanded from a half hour to an hour, which really means it expanded from like 20 minutes to like 44 minutes because it still had all the commercial breaks. Anyway, it's basically the exact same show as Alfred Hitchcock Presents, just longer. And I'm including this in here just to kind of get as comprehensive a look at John Cassavetes' work as possible. And Cassavetes was in a couple episodes of this, always playing like one-off characters. I think he's always the villain too. He kind of got, maybe not quite typecast, but he got cast as a lot of villain roles. So yeah, I'm not ranking the entire Alfred Hitchcock Hour. I'm just ranking just one of the Cassavetes episodes, which is called, I think it's called Murder Case, but it's like, couldn't pretty much every episode of both Alfred Hitchcock TV shows be called Murder Case? That's what it always is. And, you know, that generic title is reflective of the content of this particular episode, which is pretty generic. I mean, it's fine. The reason why I picked this episode in particular, even though he did a couple episodes of the show, is that this one has both him and Jenna Rollins, his real-life wife, who was also the leading lady of many of his movies, including Love Streams. I didn't mention her there, but she's phenomenal in Love Streams, and the two of them act side by side in that one. They act side by side in that Murder Case episode of the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, and they're both really good. They have a fun dynamic where they're a couple, but she's married to this other rich guy. They're having an affair together, and he's plotting to murder her husband so they can be together and also get rich somehow. But it's kind of, it's mostly really generic, and then it has an ending where you're just like, how does that make sense? And it's a case of the show not going, here's a twist, and then explaining it. It has a twist, like just for the sake of having a twist. And it's a twist that doesn't make any sense. Mostly generic, and then a nonsense ending. It's like a D. That episode, again, I'm not reading the whole show. It's fine. Like, it's still fun to see them acting together. It's always good to see those two acting together. Okay, next up, I'm going to grab the one that's poking up from the top a little bit. That would be The Dirty Dozen. I saw this for the first time relatively recently. I just watched it when I first started working on my Cassavetes video essay. I'd been meaning to watch it for a while, but never really had the motivation to seek it out until I was trying to go through as much of Cassavetes' body of work as possible. He's really good in this, by the way. This was kind of a breakout role in a way. He had been having like lots of TV success, but usually playing like one-off villains or one-off like guest star roles. He also had this show down here, Johnny Staccato, that I'll talk about later, which was a leading role, but it only lasted one season. Actually, it might have even been less than a full season because, you know, they had canceled like halfway through sometimes. But anyway, Dirty Dozen is one of his biggest film roles, and it was kind of a breakout role for him. I think the money that he got from Dirty Dozen and from Rosemary's Baby and whatnot, you can directly track his proceeds from those big movies into the budget for his directorial work, which is really cool. The actual mission component of the movie is where it shines. It spends way too long with them in like boot camp, going through like training. That stuff is engaging at first when you're getting a feel for their like the dynamic between them and how dysfunctional they are, but they just drag it out so long, and it starts repeating the same beats over and over again, and then it keeps going for another like half hour after that, just the boot camp part. Once it finally shifts gears and get into the mission, it gets good again, and it opens really strong too. Starts strong, really sagging like next act, and then it gets good again. I think it's a B overall. I'm going to bump it up a little bit for like how good the climax is and how influential the film is overall. Okay, moving on to Shadows. Shadows was not just John Cassavetes' first directorial film, but it is often credited as the first independent film ever made, which is kind of the focus of my John Cassavetes video essay. I talked extensively about Shadows in that video, so instead of rehashing stuff here, I'll just say go watch that video essay if you want to hear my thoughts on Shadows. The only thing I'll say about it here is that, like Faces, it's extremely rough around the edges. Shadows is a case of a film, kind of like I said about Faces, where you're not super likely to actively enjoy it. Like, it's not entertaining, so to speak, in the way that you usually go into a movie to be entertained. But it's so important to film history, so influential, and so far ahead of its time. It's a film to appreciate and respect and admire more than like straight up enjoy. And I'm going to give it a B for that. Okay, Husbands. Husbands is a tricky film to talk about because I don't think it succeeds in all of its goals, but I think it's really great regardless. I think it's a great drama and character study of these three guys, and by extension, a like type of person that these three guys represent. But I think it fails in its goal of being a comedy. Husbands is supposed to be a comedy, or at least that's how like the studio tried to bill it. I don't know if maybe Cassavetes didn't actually mean for it to be a comedy and the studio just tried to do that after the fact. I think there are some moments where it's trying to be funny. It isn't funny. It's extremely engaging on a dramatic level, though. So it's kind of like it failed at what it's going for, but it succeeded at something else, or it succeeded at like, part of what it was going for. Because there's great character work, great drama, and also really great direction, really great like mise en scène, great sense of restraint in terms of how scenes are shot and presented, and like the lack of editing. Scenes really linger. Not so much like in Faces where they're like really meandering and they go all over the place and they're not like focused. There's definitely some of that in Husbands. But in Husbands, what he managed to accomplish is get that meandering and like circumlocutive scene structure, but always like bring it back around by the end to nail the point of the scene and justify all that gobbledygook that was in the middle. It comes back around and justifies it. I do think Faces is a more powerful piece of work overall, though. Like it's got the better drama. I won't say the better performances. The performances are fantastic in both, but Faces has, I think, better dramatic material to work with, and it doesn't have the downside of like trying and kind of failing to be a comedy. Husbands, I think, is another B. Again, I would say don't start with Husbands. It's not a good one to start with. Okay, next up is Minnie and Moskowitz. This is one of his directorial efforts that I didn't talk about quite as much in the video essay. Not for any reason, not because it's like bad or anything. It's really great. Again, it didn't really fit into one of the like chapters of the essay. It's really great. Seymour Cassel is possibly the best he ever was in his whole career in this movie. And again, Jenna Rollins is excellent. Jenna Rollins is just always incredible when she's working with Cassavetes, and what I've seen of her beyond Cassavetes as well. She's just really fantastic actor. Apparently, she only ever planned on doing stage work. She didn't want to do films until Cassavetes kind of like twisted her arm and made her do films. She was just going to stay on stage forever. Anyway, the two of them are great. It's a romance. The thing is, it's a romance where I don't actually believe the romance at all. Or it's not that I don't believe it, it's that I'm not in favor of it. It's a case where it's a romance between Minnie and Moskowitz, and it's got the like will they won't they thing, and it's got the like the breakup and the get together and the whatever, all the like kind of like the structural beats that you would expect in a like studio romance or even a studio rom-com. And there is some comedy in Minnie and Moskowitz, and I will say the comedy is a lot more effective in Minnie and Moskowitz than it was in Husbands. The comedy mostly really lands in this. It's really funny, but it's still mostly a drama, I would say. I definitely would not categorize it as like a comedy, like a capital C comedy. It's still mostly a drama of romance. Anyway, it hits a lot of the beats of those studio romance films, but in such a distinctly Cassavetes way, where he like contorts that formula so much that it doesn't even really resemble that anymore by the time the film is actually like put together, because the scenes are still very long and like exploratory. The characters are still like really fucked up and like really complicated and layered. So yeah, the one downside, or I wouldn't even call it a downside really, the one potential downside is that I'm not in favor of this romance, because it's got the will they won't they, the breakup and stuff, and the whole time I'm watching this movie I just see Moskowitz as a danger that I want Minnie to run away from, run in the opposite direction. And I think the film wants you to kind of like root for their romance, like the oddball, outsider romance thing. But I kind of feel like Moskowitz is just a little too fucked up and a little too damaged to where he's like unhinged and feels like he would end up like doing a murder-suicide a couple of years down the line outside the movie. I don't know. I don't root for them ending up together, but whatever. It honestly doesn't really affect the movie. It's just as enjoyable regardless. I think it's really good. I think I might I might go all the way to A with it, but I think I enjoy it about as much as Husbands. I'm going to go to A. I'm going to go to A with it. I like it a lot. I could rewatch it right now, and I kind of want to, actually. So I'm going to put it in A. Okay, next up is Machine Gun McCain. We are out of Cassavetes directing territory again. This is now a Cassavetes acting role, but I picked this one to cover specifically because it's not just Cassavetes, it's him and a couple of his frequent collaborators. It's him and Peter Falk are the two stars of the film. And also there's a more than a cameo, but not quite a main supporting role. But Jenna Rowland shows up as well, and her and Cassavetes have a bunch of have a sequence together. And again, they're a romantic coupling again, which is just always great to see the two of them together. The thing with Falk though, Cassavetes and Falk are both really good in this movie. They don't have any fucking scenes together. Cassavetes and Falk have 0 scenes together. They have 0 screen time together. They talk about each other on the phone to other people. That's the closest they get. As a fan of both of them, that's disappointing, right? But on a structural level, on just a filmmaking level, it's bad in that regard too, because these are two characters who should definitely be interacting. At the start of the movie, in the middle, they can go their separate ways, and then the climax should bring the two of them together again, and it just doesn't. Instead, what it does is it has Cassavetes rocket off in his own direction, and he has the big climax. Falk literally buys a plane ticket, gets on the plane, and just flies out of the movie with 45 minutes left. That doesn't make any sense. Consider he's the protagonist of the movie. He's the guy we meet first. He's our introduction to the story. And he's just gone for the entire final act of the movie. It makes no sense. And that's kind of representative of Machine Gun McCain overall. It's got some cool moments, some cool stylistic moments, and certain scenes are shot really well. Other scenes, not quite as much. There's also some action in the back half that is okay. It's not great, but it's okay. It's enjoyable enough. There's a car chase that's kind of fun, I guess, but it's nothing too special. But yeah, it's not a great film. It's a very Italian production, if you know what I mean. This is technically I think they call it a Poliziotteschi film, right? Which is the Italian gangster exploitation films. It's one of those, and they just happen to have Cassavetes and Falk and Rowlands in it. But it's not a good movie. It's not bad, but it's not a movie anybody ever needs to watch. I'd give it a D. It's not that bad. It's engaging enough, but you can skip it. Okay, next up is Mikey and Nicky. Now, this one is not directed by Cassavetes, but it's the film out of all of his non-directed movies that feels the most like he directed it. It's actually directed by Elaine May. So it's John Cassavetes and Peter Falk again. It's the two of them throughout the entire film. Most of the movie is just the two of them talking in various locations. And it's a case where they improvised the entire film. They improvised everything. The film started off with basically just the concept of there are two gangsters who are friends. When it comes time for the gang boss to have one of the friends whacked, it needs to be carried out by the gangster who's the guy's friend so that he doesn't see it coming. That's the premise that they started with. And then basically Cassavetes and Falk just kind of whirlwinded their way through the rest of the film. Elaine May famously shot so much celluloid for this film that she shot as much as 17 or 18 feature-length films usually shoot in total for all of the footage that gets cut up and edited. She shot 17 films worth of footage because what would happen is the camera would roll, Cassavetes and Falk would start improvising, and she would just have multiple cameras roll and swap them out and just let the cameras roll and roll and roll as they improvised their scenes and figured them out. There's a story that I don't know if it's true, but I saw it reported in multiple places that Elaine May used to just completely take the reins off them, just let them go wild. And even if they left the room, she would just keep the cameras rolling on the room. And apparently there's a story where the cam op went to cut, and she said, "What are you doing? Don't cut." And the cam op goes, they left. There's no one here. And she goes, "But they might return." And she knew that if they returned, they would still be in character, and they would have been in character the whole time they were out in the room, and, they would have been improvising a scene together. They don't care about the cameras. They don't care about, the artifice of the movie. They care about the drama that the two of them are carrying out together. Anyway, Mikey and Nicky is fucking fantastic. It's honestly like the best Cassavetes movie that Cassavetes didn't make. I think it's an S tier. I adore this film. It's honestly like an all-time favorite of mine, which I would also say about Love Streams and one of the other movies that I'm going to talk about. It's really, really good. If you're a fan of Cassavetes, you gotta see it. If you're a fan of just Peter Falk, you gotta see it, because he's fantastic in it too. Okay, next up is Too Late Blues. This was one of Cassavetes' studio projects. It's kind of like a director for hire thing. It doesn't feel like a Cassavetes movie at all. And it's really just not that good. It's okay, I guess, on a technical level, it's okay. Like, it's much more refined and polished than like Shadows or even Faces, which he made after, because he's working within the confines of the studio system. It has to be polished. And it's being made in the more structured, rigid way of studio filmmaking that allows for that kind of polish. Too Late Blues feels like a film that anybody else could have directed. And also, I don't like the lead performance. I think the main actor's kind of weak. I forget his name, but he's mostly known as a musician. This was he did some other movies, but I think this was him trying to be like, I'm not just a musician, I'm also a dramatic leading man, and he's not a good dramatic leading man, I don't think. Yeah, Bobby Darin, that's his name. Oh, he was actually in Shadows, apparently, as an uncredited man wearing sunglasses, dancing, and later chewing gum at rehearsal. What a character name. Yeah, mostly known as a musician. And yeah, I don't think he's a very good actor. I think he's kind of wooded and not too believable in Too Late Blues. So on top of the weak performance, a script that's nothing special, and an overall feeling that feels like it could have been directed by any number of studio filmmakers, not Cassavetes at all, I think this is an E. I think go out of your way to avoid it. Okay, next up is Gloria. Gloria is a Cassavetes film through and through, and you can feel it in certain areas, mostly in the quieter scenes, the way that the like nighttime routines unfold between Jenna Rollins again and this child who she's kind of taking under her wing. The way those scenes unfold, you go, oh, it's Cassavetes. The way most of the rest of the movie unfolds, it doesn't feel so much like Cassavetes. It feels like him trying to color inside the lines a little bit more, not as much as he did with Too Late Blues and A Child is Waiting. Gloria is like an action movie, like an action thriller. If it's got one big weakness, it's that the plot isn't that special. Honestly, it's a plot that became way more cliche later on. It's basically the plot of like Leon the Professional, which is also the plot of like The Man from Nowhere, and then Logan took the same plot. The Last of Us kind of has the same thing. Basically, an adult killer protecting a child, right? Like, that's kind of a staple of the genre. I don't think Gloria was the first one to do it, and it's certainly not the last one to do it. But, it's functional. Now, there actually is some action, which you don't usually get in a Cassavetes movie. I guess there's the centerpiece killing of a Chinese bookie, but it doesn't really feel like an action sequence. It still feels like, a creeping, methodical, like, thriller scene. There's gunfire, I guess, but it's not like exciting action. Whereas Gloria does aim for exciting action, and it kind of succeeds. Like she shoots a car and it flips over, like that's exciting action, I guess. There's a shootout involving like an elevator. That's kind of fun. It's okay. The ending isn't great. Jenna Rollins is great though. You believe her as this killer. She pulls off the tough, hardened criminal vibe really well. It's really engaging, and it is effectively entertaining. It's one of his most accessible movies. It probably is his most accessible directorial output, as far as like, you don't need to be a Cassavetes fan. You don't really need to know what he's all about to enjoy this one. So it's, and for what it is, it's pretty good. I think it's a C though. I was going to put it in B for a second, but it's, in his overall canon, it's a C though. Okay, next up is A Woman Under the Influence. This is my favorite of his films. This is my favorite of his directorial work. This is one of those like perfect films for me. It was the first Cassavetes that I watched, and it was a great introduction to him, and it honestly never got topped. I adore this film, every moment of it, everything it's doing, everything it's saying. I think it's fantastic. I hold this in like the best films ever made. And yes, I am still working on my top 250 best films ever made video. It's been years that I've been working on it, but I am still working on it. And you can bet your ass that Woman Under the Influence is going to be on there. Okay, next up is Opening Night. I didn't talk about this one quite as much in my essay either, just like Minnie and Moskowitz. It's really good, though. I talked about it briefly. It's excellent. I think it's another one of his best. It's definitely an A. It doesn't quite go to the S, but it's a strong A. And I would say it's a stronger A than Minnie and Moskowitz. You know, I think I am going to move Minnie and Moskowitz down to a B, but Opening Nights is going to stay firmly in the A territory. Again, Jenna Rollins, again, Ben Gazzara, and again, John Cassavetes himself with a great supporting role. Jenna Rollins is really the star of the show, though. She is just magnetic in this role, as she is in every other role, but this one she's really got a ton to work with. It's just great stuff. I don't have too much to say about this one. It's just really solid. I think this one is more accessible than a lot of his films, too. I'd say Opening Night is a really good starting point. Okay, next up is Johnny Staccato. There's a good chance you've never heard of this fucking thing. This is a TV show that Cassavetes was the star of way back near the start of his career. I think he also directed a bunch of the episodes, actually maybe even all of them. And I don't know if he wrote any of them. But yeah, he was heavily involved behind the scenes too. It didn't last long. It got canceled pretty quick. The premise is, it's a pretty flimsy premise, but it's just to set up a like noir procedural where every week he solves a different crime. Basically, he's a jazz pianist who moonlights as a PI. That's like the hook for the show, which isn't that big of a hook. It's a little generic. And I watched some of it. I watched a couple episodes. It's okay. It's really nothing special. It's nothing great. It feels like a lot of TV of the era where like it's functional, it tells a decent enough story, the performances are okay. The thing with this one in particular, what actually felt a little weaker than some other shows from that era that I've seen, is it was moving like way too fast to where every scene is like Cassavetes narrating, going like, so I took the train across town and I walked into the whatever, and then he's just like in a scene and he has like one or two lines of dialogue and then he's back out the door and then more narration about, and so I walked 3 blocks and I hopped on the bus, and it's just like he's constantly going from place to place, but they didn't have like the budget, I guess, to show his travels or to have anything interesting happening on his travels. So it's just constant scenes of him walking into a room, delivering a couple lines of dialogue, and then walking out of the room straight into a different room with like nothing much of note happening. Like he's solving a crime, but it's not like a mystery where you can like piece things together. He's just kind of going through the motions. Not a very good show. I'd give it a D. Yeah, not really worth going back to. If you're a Cassavetes super fan and you've watched everything else, I'd recommend it over, not really. I mean, you probably would enjoy Machine Gun McCain more, to be frank. Okay, but last up, A Child is Waiting. This is his other studio movie, like through and through, where he didn't write the script. I think it's adapted from a book, and it's a case of, again, it doesn't really feel like a Cassavetes film. It feels very much like a studio film that other directors could have made. But unlike Too Late Blues, it actually is quite good. It has really good performances from Burt Lancaster and what's her name? Wizard of Oz girl, Judy Garland. I called Judy Garland Julie Garner. So they're both really good in it, and their characters are like just interesting enough. It's a different side of Judy Garland than you've probably seen if you're only familiar with her from Wizard of Oz and maybe some of her other higher profile movies. It's pretty good. There's a weird dissonance going on in this film between the material and the way that Cassavetes portrays it. It kind of feels like the script is really dated in some ways. Like some of the messaging is kind of like, yeesh, that didn't age well. But somehow the way Cassavetes spins it, even though you can like see the objective material and go, oh, that didn't age well, the way Cassavetes presents it has like this extra humanity to it, this like extra empathy to it, where it feels like the way he's telling it hasn't aged at all. It's actually like really progressive and ahead of its time, even though the material itself is a little old-fashioned in how it's looking at Specifically in this case, it's looking at like mental health issues and specifically in children and like children with like learning disabilities and how they're sort of abandoned by their parents. It's an interesting film. I think it is pretty good, actually. It might be a B, but it's probably a C. So all three in the C here, these are all strong C's. They're all strong C's. They're all like halfway to B, right? D and E, weaker. Everything up here, strong recommendation. Big, strong recommendation. So if you're looking for a place to start with Cassavetes, if you're new to Cassavetes, I think the best places to start are Opening Night, Killing of a Chinese Bookie, or Love Streams or Woman Under the Influence. Those are good places to start. If you don't want to peak right away, I would say save these two because these two are his best. So probably Opening Night or Killing of a Chinese Bookie. So yeah, that's my Cassavetes tier list. It is kind of a widespread all over the place, but even as films that I think are significantly flawed, I do still love them on a different level. Like, I can acknowledge the flaws and still love them wholeheartedly. You can let me know where you'd rank Cassavetes films in the comments. And there's a playlist on screen and in the description if you want to check out more tier lists. I'll see you next time. So long.